All right. Well, welcome everyone. I think the flow of people in from the waiting room is slowing down a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I am Lynn Abramson, president of the Clean Energy Business Network, and we welcome you to our webinar on navigating Department of Energy clean energy manufacturing initiatives. So a few quick words of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar and we will be distributing the recording and the slide deck to all registrants. And I wanted to ask you to please go ahead and put your questions in the chat at any point. We're going to pause about halfway through for questions on some of the prize opportunities we will be discussing. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll pause for questions, hearing from some of our federal guest speakers. So next slide, please. So just a quick summary of our agenda and some of the programs that we'll be discussing today. So first, we'll start with an introduction to the Clean Energy Business Network and some of the resources that we have available for businesses and community leaders across the United States. And then we're going to talk about several funding opportunities and programs that are designed to support a resurgence in the United States manufacturing sector. And these range from very early stage projects or programs that are there to support early stage technology R&D or project deployment at sort of the pilot initial scale, all the way through more mature technology deployment. So these aren't, this isn't a perfect division of these programs. They are cross-cutting across multiple stages, but we want to kind of give you the sense of what it might look like from conception all the way through execution of a project and some of the ways that you might be able to finance some of the initiatives for your community. So several of the earlier stage programs we will be discussing are part of the American-Made Challenges, and I'll be explaining in a few moments what that is. But there are two prizes in particular we want to highlight: the Community Energy Innovation Prize and the Make It Prize. And then we're going to be joined by guest speakers, Zack Valdez, who is a strategic advisor for the DOE's Office of Manufacturing and Clean Energy Supply Chains, and Briggs, who is Deputy Executive Director for the federal government's Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. And they're going to tell us a little bit more about the newly created Office of Manufacturing and Clean Energy Supply Chains, or MESC, as well as the implementation of the Section 48C Advanced Energy Project Credit, which is a tax credit to spur domestic manufacturing. So next slide, please. Great. So I'm going to start, as I mentioned, with an overview of the Clean Energy Business Network and some of the resources that we have available for you. Next slide. So the Clean Energy Business Network is a nationwide nonprofit organization that serves as the small business voice for the clean energy economy. We primarily focus on serving small businesses as well as community-based organizations through policy support, market and technology education, and business development assistance. Next slide. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., and our network spans more than 8,000 small business and community leaders nationwide across the U.S., working in a very broad range of zero and low carbon energy technologies. Through both our small business and community engagement, a big theme behind our work is expanding access to and participation in the clean energy economy. And a critical part of that is intentional engagement with majority-minority communities. We work with the federal government, both on the policy front, including contributing to ideas or informing program design, as well as the stakeholder outreach front, where we serve, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but as a power connector with the American-Made Challenges. And through a variety of other communications and events we produce to distill and promote government resources. So some of the examples of free resources that we have available to the public that you should feel free to use to advance your own companies or communities or priorities include the U.S. Clean Tech Funding Database, which is a searchable aggregation of federal, state, and private sector resources for energy innovators and community organizations. We also offer blogs and email digests distilling government programs, including 2 series unpacking recent grant programs and tax incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, which we'll talk a little bit further about today. So we welcome you to take anything you find useful from our resources. And also, if you work with a network yourself in your state or community, please feel free to share that and amplify that. There's no pride of ownership of any of these resources. We want them to be broadly available. Okay, I want to particularly flag a brand new blog post within these series called Breaking Down the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, which provides background on this new DOE office that was established in 2022 and that we'll be hearing a little bit further about later today. And some of the topics include MESC's functions and approach, funding programs, impact, and how to engage. And so again, stay tuned because we're going to be hearing from MESC and the Interagency Working Group later. Okay, so now we're going to talk to, before we get into the manufacturing programs, again, we will be sharing our slides, but I just spoke further about some of the CEBN resources that are available, and we will be distributing this, but here are our contact information, ways that you can get in touch with our team. So with that brief introduction of our program, I want to turn it over to an overview of some specific federal resources relating to manufacturing. So why is this important? Just to set the stage, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law enacted in 2021 and Inflation Reduction Act enacted in 2022 have created a massive flow of new funding programs in clean energy. Both of these include a stated mission of investing in domestic manufacturing in the United States. And there has been broad bipartisan interest in spurring that resurgence of US manufacturing. And as the clean energy sector does represent the growth area of the energy economy and the future transition of the energy economy, there really is quite a bit of significant opportunity for economic growth in communities across the country in this area. So one of the programs that we will be talking about is, again, established in 2022, the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, that just since its inception has already infused $5 billion into the private sector. And I will also say, for those of you joining from communities or organizations that are working to support disadvantaged, underinvested, underrepresented communities, a lot of this goes hand in hand with the Justice 40 initiative, which has been very intentional about engaging diverse applicants, small businesses, and communities in federal funding opportunities. So that landscape picture is just to kind of convey that there's a lot of money that's coming out the door from the federal government. There is a focus on manufacturing as part of that. And there is additionally this focus on trying to reach new communities that haven't historically benefited from the clean energy economy. And all that is to say that we really hope that our audience dialing in today and some of the networks that you're tapped into will take advantage of these opportunities and really see this as a great way to help advance your local economic development priorities. So I'm going to talk about some of the earlier stage resources that are available from the Department of Energy's American-Made Challenges program. And for context, that is a broad suite of various funding initiatives to fast track the development of new clean energy technologies as well as community deployment. So it serves as a fast track to innovation and uses prizes, training, teaming, and mentoring in partnership with a variety of institutions across the country. It is led by the Department of Energy's one of the national laboratories, which is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, in partnership with the American-Made Network, which is a community of service providers across the nation offering resources for companies and organizations in clean energy and environmental justice. The vast majority of the support organizations within this network are connectors, and they provide services sometimes in exchange for certain bonus awards from the Department of Energy, sometimes for free, sometimes at cost. So you can visit the matching tool, this Search the American-Made Network link that we've provided, and look for specific types of organizations that match your needs. But recognize that with the connectors, they may or may not be available at the time you reach out. They may or may not have capacity or a way to actually, fund their engagement with your program. So if you don't hear back right away, do try another organization. And then separately, there are power connectors, which are under contract with the Department of Energy to help on specific tasks or prizes. And since 2021, the Clean Energy Business Network has served as one of these. Now, that doesn't mean we're working on every single prize, although we do try to amplify all the prizes. We tend to be contracted to help on specific initiatives relating to particular prizes. And there are a growing community of power connectors working in this capacity. Just a quick side note, I will mention that if any of you are running university programs, outreach, state, local programs, and are interested in learning about becoming a connector or a power connector, feel free to get in touch with us, and we're happy to speak to you in that peer-to-peer experience. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two specific prizes that are currently available for funding manufacturing-related initiatives. And hopefully, we have been engaging a lot of the folks that are on this call today, so hopefully this is not your first time hearing about these prizes, as the deadlines are coming up, in some cases tomorrow. But what our goal here is to make sure that you fully understand what these prizes are for, and then the broader context of how you can leverage the funding from these prizes if you succeed in winning them to continue your projects down the road through some of those more mature programs we'll be discussing, such as MESC and 48C. So just in case this is your first time hearing of these prizes, I'll give you a quick orientation and also let you know about ways to engage with these and similar concepts in the future. So first, the Community Energy Innovation Prize offers up to $200,000 per recipient, plus additional grand prizes and in-kind mentorship to organizations working to promote innovation, entrepreneurship, capacity building, and economic development in communities historically underrepresented in climate and energy technology funding. So that's that Justice 40 component we mentioned earlier, trying to reach new communities. There are 3 tracks under this prize, and the one we'll particularly focus on today is the manufacturing ecosystem track, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about the goals of that. The deadline of the 2 remaining tracks is tomorrow. So again, if this is your first time hearing about this, it may be soon for you to apply. Still possible though. But I will say that similar types of prizes are constantly coming around. So it is good for you to look through this and be aware of this type of opportunity. If you are planning on applying, I want to flag that we have been offering group office hours to answer applicants' questions and provide feedback, go over anything that's unclear in the process for applying. And we have our final group office hours tomorrow at 11 a.m. So it's a few hours ahead of the deadline to provide that last minute application assistance and last minute feedback. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the manufacturing ecosystem track. This is a track that specifically seeks to support the development of clean energy manufacturing ecosystems through programs that address barriers in early stage technology development and adoption. So these are just some examples of some of the eligible uses. You could be working to cultivate entrepreneurial talent, increase funding access, attractive private financing, or helping applicants with applying for government funding, connecting potential developers as well as customers, supporting industry-wide decarbonization initiatives, and so on. It is very broad in focus. Really, you define your community's goals. And so if you are seeking to apply by tomorrow, it's a very simple application, very straightforward, as are all of these prize challenges. You need to provide a single summary slide, an impact plan, which is a less than 5,000 word narrative, and templates are provided on the prize website. To give you an example, they also talk through some of the questions and criteria by which the judges will be evaluating your submission and the types of things they're looking for. So it's very easy to kind of go through those templates, go through those criteria, and think through how to structure your narrative to meet those objectives. And then finally, you need to submit a 3-minute video, which does not need to be professionally produced at all. You're only judged on the content and the summary of your plan, not the production quality. So we have seen people successfully win prizes like this using a basic cell phone video. I will say, if you are planning to do the video last minute, make sure you have a YouTube account set up or some other way to get it online, because you will be submitting this as a link. And feel free to contact us if you have questions, or jump in our office hours tomorrow. So this prize is an example of something at the very earliest stages of capacity building in communities. Again, if you aren't able to apply tomorrow, there will be similar things like this down the road. It's not a ton of money. It's $210,000 if you win it. But what you can do with that funding is hire some of the support staff you need to get organized: project managers, grant writers. You know, if it's sort of a volunteer-led initiative in your program, you can provide some support to actually get an initiative off the ground and compete for larger pools of funding. So let's talk about the Make It Prize, which is a little bit intermediate in terms of the types of stages that are available. And this is called the Manufacture of Advanced Key Energy Infrastructure Technologies, or more simply, the Make It Prize, which aims to catalyze domestic manufacturing of critical clean energy technology components and to support manufacturing activity in communities. So there are 2 tracks available under this prize. And I would say that of these, the strategies track would be earlier in stage, and that is offering up to $400,000 per awardee to community organizations to develop a roadmap for establishing clean tech manufacturing in their area. The submissions are due February 15th, 2024, so you do have a couple more weeks for this one. And we are offering one-on-one office hours with the CEBN, where we can talk through your projects, give you feedback on your proposal, suggest additional resources or connections that might be useful to you. And then the other track is the facilities track, which is for pilot stage or sort of early stage project deployment. So this is offering up to $5 million per awardee to advance or essentially help with the early stages of construction and planning for a manufacturing facility. So getting it all the way to shovel ready in select clean tech areas. And there are 4 specific technology areas of interest identified. The statements of intent for that one, and this is a very simple, essentially 2-page summary of what you're planning to do. So you could apply today if you're still interested, but those are due today. But so this is, something that is more down the road for you're trying to construct the facility, whereas the strategies track, again, is that early stage roadmap for your community. And I'm going to speak a little bit more on the next slide about that strategies track. So just to give you a little bit more color on what this track seeks to support, its goal is to support collaborative teams who are working together to promote manufacturing activity, economic development, growth, and quality of life in their region or community. And so I will say, in terms of the previous winners for this, there were sort of 2 funding rounds for this prize. We saw that the applications that were most successful were those that were community-based, either led by a local government or nonprofit that had, deep reach through the community, economic development. You can be a private sector entity and be the lead applicant for this, but you have to really demonstrate that you are deeply connected with the community and that you are advancing the community's goals rather than simply the goals of your private sector company. Okay, so that's sort of some important information, I think, to understand the perspective for this prize. So what is the goal? This track is helping you with the plan to make a plan. Okay, so we've had a lot of applicants ask questions about, how much do I have to have figured out in advance? No, this is to give you that capacity to figure out that roadmap for your region. So the goal is by the end of 3 prize phases, your team will have prepared a credible roadmap to establish clean energy manufacturing activity, and you will have secured a letter of commitment from at least 1 manufacturing partner. So it helps you figure out what's a good suitable industry for our region, what types of capacity or existing infrastructure can we leverage, what infrastructure could be repurposed. and to actually build those relationships with the private sector so that you can get a commitment from a manufacturer who says, yes, I want to work in this community. Each team can win up to $400,000 over 3 phases of the prize, so it is a significant amount of money. And phase 1 offers $50,000 for up to 30 teams. And then generally with all these prizes, you see a down selection over time in who can proceed. So this can include manufacturing of any type of clean energy technology or component. And that's pretty broad in focus. The other track I mentioned, facilities, which is helping to build a pilot facility, that does have very narrowly constrained technology areas, and that is defined in the rules. And this track is particularly focused on supporting disadvantaged communities. That's not the limitation. And I would say if you don't see yourself showing up exactly within those guidelines, but can really make a case for the need for economic development in your region, then definitely go for it. Describe your community. Okay, so going to the next slide, we're going to pause here for a few minutes, and at about 12:30, we will be joined by our guest speakers from MESC and the Interagency Working Group. So we want to just take some time. We'll go through some of the questions in the chat and answer those, and happy to talk about CEBN resources, about the prizes we discussed, or and other types of policies that might be of interest. Okay, so taking a look. All right, so I saw some requests for winning examples, which I think our staff put in the chat. That's a great question. If you take a look at what my colleague Awa put in the track for strategies track winners round 1, or even if you go to that American Made Challenges website I flagged earlier and look at other types of prize challenges that have occurred in the past, you can see that there's a very, very broad range of organizations and communities there. So some early stage communities that have absolutely no history of involvement in the clean energy industry and are starting from scratch, all the way to organizations that are trying to scale a new initiative. I do see some comments. Okay, I do see a comment from one of our attendees about the need to support small businesses versus corporate America, and some frustration on that front in terms of, where dollars actually flow. And you have come to the right place because, yes, we echo that value in terms of investing in small businesses. That is the mission of the Clean Energy Business Network. And part of what we are trying to do through programs like this is show that there are resources such as these prizes, as well as some of the funds available that we'll be just talking about in a moment, that can be made available to small businesses. And additionally, we urge you, when larger projects are announced, such as investments in these big manufacturing hubs, et cetera, that are multi-billion dollars, big recipients, go and look at who won those funds and look at what their priorities are. And remember that they're going to need subcontractors, technology providers, project developers, et cetera, in communities across the country. And so we hope that you can also leverage that information. Okay. A couple of folks saying that they see a good fit for their organization. One question about solar thermal technology manufacturing. Many of the DOE funding programs are for PV, electric generation. Anything for solar thermal? Yes, this is a good question. So some of the things I discussed, so with both the Community Energy Innovation Prize manufacturing track, as well as the Make It Prize strategies track, they are not technology prescriptive. It's really up to the applicants to decide what is most attractive for their region. But I did note that those particular tracks are community-led, right? So in cases, and we see this frequently, there are startups or private sector small businesses that are looking to build out their technology in certain communities. we urge you to go and look at who has registered as teams on these prizes. We have also produced and it put links on some of the prize web pages for teaming forms. Reach out, kind of explore where people are interested in developing these projects and get in touch to talk about your capabilities. Because again, you know, your private sector company like can't really be the lead on those community-based prizes, but you can work with some of the recipients of those funds to leverage some of those dollars to help build out your capabilities in their region. So hopefully that's helpful. I think some of the projects we'll be discussing momentarily, such as the 48C credit, are pretty technology mass agnostic. Okay, so then I saw a question on the prize amounts and also qualifying types of activities. Does a community training business for training and finding jobs qualify for prizes? Absolutely. Those are definitely eligible uses of these kinds of prizes. Again, I think the question is, are you the correct entity? So I saw the note of business, you know, if you're a private sector business, make sure your clients, the people you're working with, are in the community and you demonstrate that close connection with the community. And then also clarifying the total possible award, the American made. So with this, the Community Energy Innovation Prize, the total possible award is $200,000 per team. The Make It Strategies track, the second prize I discussed, is the total possible award is $400,000. And we will share this in the slide deck as well, because I know there's a lot of information to absorb. And then finally, before we turn it over to our guest speakers, yes, this there's a mention of SBIR, STTR, which we have also been supporting. I will say that, so there's some questions about the letter of intent deadline. This year, the SBIR, STTR process has been pushed back due to some changes that were made in the recent reauthorization of the program, combined with some of the uncertainty created by the potential government shutdown and sort of looming fights in Congress about federal funding. And so the letter of intent deadline ended up being pushed back a month to be due tomorrow, as opposed to originally January 3rd. So yes, I hear you that lots of times these deadlines are all at the same time, but part of our goal and why we hope you will remain subscribed to and participating in events with our network is that we want to educate our audiences about these programs on an ongoing basis throughout the year, rather than, you know, you finding out about them just weeks before the deadline, so that we can help you map out the resources that your company or organization needs and look for how to track that, you know, in the future. And then I see a question about how to find out about upcoming programs, since the deadline is coming up for some of these prizes around the corner. That American-made challenges.org is constantly releasing new prizes and new updates. And then finally, can a partner be Canadian or foreign company? You have to have a registered entity in the US. So if you are a foreign entity, make sure that you also have a US-based entity. Okay, so we have talked a lot about the prizes. We can happy to take more questions at the end if time remains, but we are at 12:30 and our guest speakers have joined us. So it is my pleasure now to turn it over to, I believe Zack is going to kick us off, Zack Valdez, who is Strategic Advisor for the Department of Energy's Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains. And then he's going to be joined in a couple moments by Briggs White, the Deputy Executive Director for the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. So again, they'll be talking a little bit more about those funding pathways down the road after you build out the plan for your community or your company and are looking to actually build and scale. So Zack, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate, first of all, just like scoping out all of our programs and prizes for your audience and your stakeholders. But more importantly, providing the opportunity for building awareness of the programs that we do have, not only in MESC, but across DOE. I'm going to be speaking in specific fashion for MESC, the Manufacturing Energy Supply Chain Office. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And then my colleague will be following up more specifically on one of the programs we're in partnership with the U.S. Treasury on, 48C, which is an investment tax credit for clean energy manufacturing, critical materials, and decarbonization efforts. This slide here is to sort of showcase through bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act funding, a lot of new offices were created to specifically focus in on the commercialization or the scaling of clean energy technologies. So traditionally, Department of Energy has been focused on more of the R&D sector and the prizes that go in. Now we're really thinking about what are the technologies we need to make that transition to clean energy. So our office is very much focused in on the investment portfolio for that at a grant level. You can go to the next slide, please. So we were created about 2 years ago through bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and then sort of reinvested on through the Inflation Reduction Act. And I put this particular slide in here to showcase that we've received other opportunities and actually worked on supply chain reports to identify where technologies exist that we want to invest in, but also that manufacturing is a long-term effort. And we realize that having communities involved in that is a very large part of it, with the idea that one of our first projects that we awarded is going to take at least 2 years before we get to a lead product. Next slide, please. And so specifically, the Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chain Office is focused on that how of the energy transition. So what are the specific areas within manufacturing or decarbonization technologies that we can develop here domestically? And what I mean by that is specifically batteries is top of mind for a lot of folks. And so where do we find the lithium to do that? How do we process it here? We're really looking at everything from the materials that go into the components to the components themselves to the final OEM that creates these things. And so how do we build a sustainable and resilient domestic energy supply chain for that? And we've been fortunate enough to receive nearly $20 billion to support that through tax credits as well as grants and funding. Really looking at not only eliminating some of these obstacles or challenges in our supply chain, but also focused in on sort of social, environmental, and equity as we think about deliberating these programs. Next slide, please. So for the folks who are more aware of what's going on in DOE, this is a really interesting chart that showcases we are not quite at the level of LPO, who does debt financing and loans, so the loan programs office. We provide grants as a means before you get to loans. So currently we're in the like $10 to $200 million range, but that doesn't include our tax credits, which I mentioned Briggs we'll get to later. But more specifically, it's where we're looking at and investing. And so it's at those areas where the commercialization is there, but maybe the technology isn't, or the technology is there, but there hasn't been a commercialization factor yet. And so we want to help scale and secure that domestic capability here within the United States. Next slide, please. I like putting this slide out here because it showcases at the moment where we were in terms of selections of programs. A few of the programs that we've run through are the heat pump selection, so developing heat pump manufacturing. The purple is our advanced energy manufacturing recycling programs. I'll get to a slide on that shortly about how that is focused in coal communities specifically. Then we have building training and assessment centers where we partnered with our industrial assessment centers, and I'll also talk a little bit more about that. But those are opportunities to focus on small, medium manufacturers and really provide assistance to not only build out the workforce, but also increase the implementation of clean energy decarbonization capabilities. And then the last one, we were provided money to support the battery and critical material supply chain. And so as we develop that, we are trying to prioritize certain areas, and those are the green dots. The states that we have here, this is also a really neat program. It's called the State Manufacturing Leadership Program. That is to focus in on how at the state level, they can focus on building smart manufacturing capabilities across the state. So we actually provide the funding to the state with the hopes that they are working with their community-based organizations and local entities to identify what are the specific technologies or products that state can really excel in and be globally competitive. Next slide, please. So one of the programs I'm really excited about is our industrial assessment centers. And these are looking at traditionally four-year institutions that would train students to go into local facilities, small, medium manufacturing facilities, and identify where they can reduce their energy burden, greenhouse gas emissions, and overall be more energy efficient. And so the students go in, they get trained by the university, they come in with an advisor, and they go in and they assess where this facility at. These are free assessments. They usually take about a day. And then they come back and they say, facility XYZ, we went and did an assessment. We kind of did some analysis. We've identified that for a $200,000 investment in a heat pump, an industrial heat pump, will save you, $50,000 a year. So they tell you that, and then what we are following up on as a new office are two things. One is we are expanding that out to community colleges, union training programs, and apprenticeship programs to be the facilitators for those students. So expanding it out to make sure that students who are not in institutes of higher education, four-year institutions, have that opportunity. But also when they come to you and they say, hey, this is going to be a $200,000 investment, the Department of Energy is actually going to provide up to 50% of that cost share to support that implementation of that technology. So it kind of reduces the burden for the capital investment to support that efforts while building out the workforce in those communities. Next slide. I'll just say, if you go back one, we are anticipating launching a second round of our expansion, which is to those community colleges, union training programs and apprenticeships. And then the implementation program where we're providing that funding is through those. And so I would recommend contacting them, and I'll be happy to leave some contact information for that. Next slide, please. I mentioned the Advanced Energy Project Grant Program. This is the one focusing on coal communities. We have a map set up here so you can kind of locate if you're near one, or if you know where somebody could locate to near one to receive up to 50% of a grant towards the development of that manufacturing facility, really looking to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in some form of the technology. So we would love to push more of those into those areas, and look forward to collaborating with that as that grant funding will be coming out this year, later this year as well. Next slide. Yep. I think another part of this is just decoding, and I think Lynn did a really good job of sort of what does this look like, right? And so if you're not familiar with how the DOE process works, at least for our grants, we put out a notice of intent. That is telling you that we're being ready to fund something. Then our funding opportunity announcement is the announcement. It says we have $30 million to give to clean energy workforce development programs in community colleges. From that point on, you have to develop a concept paper and or an application that showcases why you are a competitive applicant. And then we go into merit review, selection, negotiations, and awards. I think more importantly at the bottom there, it's really important to think about a few things of how we are looking at funding these programs. And some of this actually does carry on to the 48C program. Supply chain security, so being aware of where your materials are coming from in the case that there is a geopolitical risk, climate change, or something like another unfortunate pandemic that may shut down ports or other things. The other one is commercial viability. Is there a market for the product that you're developing? Decarbonization, obviously we're the Department of Energy and more of a climate shop even to some say. So making sure that you're focusing on that. And then I think the last one is those community benefits and workforce development. And so that's how this administration has tried to import the idea that when a company applies for a program, we want to make sure that they have buy-in from that community. If you go to the next slide, please. This slide going from green to red showcases what they've deemed as disadvantaged communities based on a number of factors. The dots there show some of the projects that we've already developed. And really what we're trying to showcase here is this idea that not only are we trying to strengthen supply chains and community benefit programs are really helping the US and local communities integrate into that supply chain life cycle. So what is the workforce needs? How can they clean up the local community where it feels like it needs the most importance, whether it be workforce or schools. And so having that partnership as we give out this funding, as well as generating money into that economy. So we want to make sure that the workforce is from there, that we feel like these things are supporting it. So for instance, we have Solvay, which is a battery material separation processing plant in Georgia. And they are, through our funding, they are creating more than 500 local construction jobs, as well as 100 highly skilled manufacturing jobs, with more than 500, potentially 500 indirect jobs that we want them to build from that community. So being a cluster for economic development and strengthening the supply chains is really at the heart of what we're doing. I hope I sort of provided an overview of what MESC does, and I will put my email in the chat, but I'm now going to move it over to my colleague, Briggs. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Zach and Lynn and CEBN. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. You just got a great overview of MESC, and we couldn't be more excited to be working with them and IRS and Treasury on the 48C opportunity. I also want to applaud their investments in coal communities through the Bill Provision 40209 program that Zach showed, and even other things like the battery manufacturing grants that were there, and more to come. Just a brief mention on the interagency working group. This was a working group that was established by President Biden in the first week of his current term, and really focuses on bringing a whole of government approach to supporting energy communities, energy workers, and trying to do things like create jobs, economic development, remediate environmental damage, et cetera, et cetera. And we see these tax credits as really fitting a great nexus between revitalizing our domestic supply chain on the technology front, but also trying to help these coal communities as they respond to economic distress due to the downturn in the coal industry. We can go to the next slide, please. So just a brief overview on 48C. So this is an investment tax credit. You receive a 30% investment tax credit. However, that requires meeting prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. Otherwise, that's reduced to 6%. Congress provided a total of a $10 billion allocation. Within that, 40% of it, or $4 billion, are set aside specifically for geographies that have had closed coal plants and coal mines. So we'll refer to those as energy communities here, but they're really restricted to coal related areas, and you can see a map that I'll go over here in a bit. The eligibility within this ITC are three categories. The first category is around clean energy manufacturing and recycling, which is actually builds on some of the scope that was funded back in 2009 through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. But now with IRA, there's additional eligibility in two additional tracks. One is critical materials processing, refining, and recycling. So not digging it out of the ground, but processing it into useful components, for example. And then the third track is reducing greenhouse gas emissions from industrial emitters. So think aluminum, cement, steel, etc. So let's go to the next slide. So here's that map I mentioned. $4 billion will go to projects within the census tracts that are identified in the blue on the map. So those are areas that, per the statutory guidance, had closed coal mines since December 31st, 1999, and closed coal plants that closed since December 31st. That $4 billion is a floor, so it could be more than that, but that's a floor that was provided by Congress. This can all be read up on either on MES 48C website or on the IRS's various notices, which I'll point to you here in a second. Let's go to the next slide. Within the first eligibility track, there's a variety of technologies that were prioritized in the first round. So where we stand now is we are currently reviewing applications. DOE is reviewing applications from round one, which was for part of the overall $10 billion allocation. There will be a forthcoming round, at least one forthcoming round sometime this year. And within round one, the priority areas were grid, heat pumps, electric vehicles, nuclear energy, solar, sustainable aviation fuels, and wind energy. DOE is currently doing a review to try to understand what came in and try to be really strategic in its work with IRS around round two to make sure that we're using these dollars wisely to secure the domestic supply chain. So on eligibility track number one, a lot of emphasis on various technologies in the energy space. Let's go to the next slide. If one were to submit a application in round one, the criterion look like this. IRS will issue a future notice, which will provide detailed guidance on round two, so stay tuned for that. But in round one, the criterion were commercial viability, greenhouse gas emissions impacts of the project, strengthening U.S. supply chains, and then workforce and community engagement. One thing I want to point out here is particularly on the workforce and community engagement piece, we are going to create the conditions by which private sectors, states, et cetera, can partner with communities, with workers, et cetera, to make sure that that criterion is well fulfilled, in addition to the other ones being, of course, important. Let's go on to the next slide. So just to give you a sense of the timeline, after guidance was issued for round one, then ultimately applicants submitted concept papers. They received an encourage or discourage letter, and then submitted full applications if they chose so. Those were reviewed sequentially. And then for round one, we have that allocation decision notifications will be made later this spring. So it kind of gives you a sense of the timeline for things. That doesn't mean round two will be exactly the same, but hopefully gives you a point of departure. Next slide. And so hopefully we've struck a chord with you and you're interested in learning more and potentially submitting an application. If so, we are underway with some stakeholder engagement activities to give you opportunities to participate. So in particular, I wanted to point out that ahead of the next round, which will be forthcoming, we want to do activities that ensure there's a robust pipeline of high quality applications. We are doing outreach to really prime the pump at this point with a wide variety of entities. We'll be looking forward to doing some regional workshops. We'll be also be creating some online tools and of course, outreach in a variety of different media markets. Next slide. And so this gives you just sort of a timeline. We're kind of wrapping up having engaged with a large number of entities, but the more the merrier. So if anybody would be willing to share this with their networks, we'd love to engage with you. And then in phase two, we're looking to really do regional workshops and other activities that bring folks together and create the conditions by which folks can opt into partnerships and ultimately, if they choose so, submit applications to DOE. Next slide. So just to give you a sense of things, in the blue, we're showing nominal targets for some 48C specific regional workshops that we intend to organize. So looking to do a regional workshop in the Intermountain West, likely in Colorado, one in the Illinois Coal Basin, likely in Indiana, and then one in Central Appalachians, likely in West Virginia. So those are really in the heart of those blue census tracts that are eligible within the $4 billion allocation. We will certainly let you all know when those get definitized, and those will be open to the public. Anybody can come, even if you're outside of those geographies, et cetera. We will also work with our networks of what we call rapid response teams, which are really coordinated federal agencies on the ground in these various communities to raise awareness and encourage folks to come participate in the process. Next slide. So with that, I want to wrap up with just a couple of more resources for you to learn more. First, I would really strongly encourage anybody that's interested to look at the IRS notices. Also, MESC has a great 48C landing page that has everything from recordings of webinars to slides to information FAQs, a lot of good FAQ information there. Also, there's a link to a map which shows the full closure eligible census tracts, so you can check that out. Next slide. And so just as we wrap up, folks may have questions. We'll be on here for the balance of this call, but also you can submit programmatic questions to the email that's listed there. And as I said, there's also a great landing page where you can find a whole bunch of additional information. You can also sign up to receive our newsletter, where we will also amplify updates through our IWG channel. So with that, let's adjourn the slides and turn it back over.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate Briggs and Zack joining us today, and just the collaboration. Oh, I'm covered. There we go. Now you can see me. The collaboration and helping to spread awareness about these programs. And I do think that that intentionality in reaching new communities is evident by these listening sessions and these outreach meetings you're doing. So I'm going to go through some of the questions we've received in the chat, and I apologize if we don't get through all of them, but we will be sharing again the recording, copies of the slides with the links to all of these programs and the application materials, as well as the best ways to get in touch with Zack and Briggs teams and engage with their programs. So a couple of questions that jumped out in the chat. We had several that expressed interest in applying to or working with industrial assessment centers. So Zack, you had mentioned that you will be calling for new applications at some point. And so how can you just speak further to when that opportunity becomes available, understanding it's not yet, typically what types of things are you looking for? What's the process for how folks can learn about those goals and how to apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is an industrial assessment center website that you can go to. The key thing is because these are generally college students, the hardest part is being within a location that they can drive to with their advisor, right? So if you're within I think it's like 100-mile range of these locations, we can connect you with the directors of those programs and say, I think if the question is, how do I get an assessment done on my facility? It's connecting with those programs. If it's, how do I receive funding to create my own sort of industrial assessment center, that funding will be coming out later this year, very near soon future springish time frame. And so at that point, you can then apply to be an industrial assessment center. Do you think that answered the question?
Yes, I think so. And I do think for those that express interest in that, taking a look at some of the entities that have won before. And I will say that there are some of these are partnerships where we'll see, like we actually just did an event in Georgia where there were some terrific HBCUs that were working in partnership with some of the, like Georgia Tech, which has won a lot of historic DOE funding. And I think that was a good way to sort of for them to like bridge the gap to newer colleges that didn't already have that footing within DOE. So there's a lot of collaborative opportunities like that. And also we had a question, this was, I thought, a really terrific question specific to IACs and how to use that resource. One of the participants mentioned that they're at a nonprofit working with low-income communities, and they would like to be a bridge for trainees to manufacturing opportunities, which I think, frankly, could speak across all of the programs that you mentioned. But do you have thoughts on how they could collaborate with an IAC or any of the other programs that the two of you referenced?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is connecting with at this point, I'm not 100% sure, but unless it's a union training apprenticeship, I guess if you're supporting apprenticeships, that's one way to do it. Or through community colleges, that's how we're expanding at this current stage. So if you don't fall within one of those buckets, what I would say is partnering with one of those institutions to then say, hey, we've already been doing this. We have the curriculum developed. We just need a sort of a mechanism to pass through this curriculum so that we can get more people into this industry. So that would be my way of thinking about how you could, if you don't fall into one of those buckets, potentially engage with someone who could be sort of a pass-through and being somewhat of a subprime of that opportunity.
Right. And I'm not even sure that they're asking to apply as much as just how do they use the resources, the technical resources.
So the grants go to the institutions, and then the implementation, I guess you could call them grants that go to the facilities are made through those recommendations by the facility, by the
Okay,
institutions.
great. That's a good, helpful clarification. Excellent. We have a couple of questions I want to kind of group together relating to understanding the different types of funding and the eligible applicants. So one, Briggs, over to you, is how does the tax credit work? And specifically, I think there's a lot of questions about this in the wake of IRA. If a company does not pay taxes, if it doesn't have tax eligibility, can it still leverage the 48C tax credit, or just, some of the other tax credits in general? How does that work?
Well, as always, would refer you to the IRS guidance, and there's a lot of resources we can make sure that your audience has. But in general, with IRA, a new and exciting aspect is direct pay, which means folks that perhaps don't have a tax bill can get a direct payment in lieu of that tax. So that is a big deal, and 48C is eligible for that. But again, would point folks to the FAQs and guidance to get more detail.
Okay, great. And then also in that vein, a topic that has come up a lot in questions that we've had with applicants is trying to understand the difference between the prizes that I mentioned and grants. And one thing I will flag is that, because this sometimes raises confusion in the application process, the grants are typically for work that you plan to do. And, it depends on the particular grant program, but there's certain sets of deliverables, and the funding, is issued contingent on the expectation you will meet those deliverables. There will be some reporting. For those that are very new to the funding landscape, the prizes are sort of awards given for your idea or work you've done so far. And the way I think is helpful to frame that is to think of it as like a pitch competition. And if you did a good job, you win the money, right? So the prizes I mentioned earlier are, we like your idea, here's the money. If you want more money, if you want to apply for the next round, then come back and say, here's what we did and what we're going to do next, right? But there's no reporting on what you did. So it really is a good way to sort of get that foot in the door with a very low risk, try new things, experiment, and try to build capacity in your community. And that will make it easier for you then to navigate some of these more complicated funding opportunities down the road. So that's one thing I wanted to flag. And then finally, I guess we're almost at time. We will make sure we'll share all these resources, but if someone is new to this funding, how do they navigate this landscape of opportunities and all of these great resources coming out? I will say from CEBN's perspective, you are now subscribed to our information, look at our newsletters, look at our funding database. We do a lot of work to pull these developments together as they're released, and we will be sure to flag some of these programs that Zack and Briggs mentioned as the next rounds of funding are released. But Zack, Briggs, you talked a lot about your community engagement strategies. You offered a lot of websites. Any advice for applicants for how they can make sure they stay on top of all of these opportunities?
For MESC, it's really the newsletter. So please sign up for that. I think there's a link in the chat. Thank you.
Okay.
And for the IWG, likewise, we have a newsletter, goes out approximately every 2 weeks, and we try to provide a roundup across 11 federal agencies worth of funding. But we will be highlighting 48C specifically because we know it's very much of interest.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to share the links to those newsletters as well when we share the slides and recording and takeaways from this event with all the registries. So feel free to get in touch with our team at CEBN if you want to follow up on any of these discussion points. But thank you again to Zack and Briggs for sharing these resources today. Thank you to our audience for joining us and for your thoughtful questions and your interest in the clean energy economy. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Take care.